From the time he was a young boy growing up in the crystal waters of Hawaii on Oahu, Keoki Stender has immersed himself to better understand our oceans with the extensive firsthand experience and knowledge of Hawaii's life in the sea. As a diver, scuba instructor, repair technician, photographer, and fish ID specialist, Keoki has wide-ranging knowledge and skills that he has used throughout his life to contribute to marine conservation and education. He has traveled to the Northwest Hawaiian Islands for biodiversity and marine surveys and worked as a veterinary lab support for the US Navy. His formal education at the University of Hawaii's Marine Option Program has also helped contribute to the years of cataloging Hawaiian endemic and Pacific Islands marine species that he maintains on his Fish ID website. It's an amazing history that Keoki has in the ocean. He has been cataloging since he was really, for such a long time, I should say. You should go check out his comprehensive Fish ID website catalog at marinelifephotography.com. But we want Keoki to tell you all about this. So now to tell us more today in person about our local ecosystems and marine life, isolated in paradise, unique marine life of the Hawaiian Islands, it's our great pleasure to welcome Hawaii's own Keoki Stender. Keoki, take it away.
Yeah, aloha. Thank you for the introduction. How's the audio here?
Great.
Test. Okay, good. All right. Well, thank you. And I've been diving for a long time, and I was always very intrigued by the special species that you only find in Hawaii. So endemism and biogeography, fish ID, those are all my passions. And I just do this because I love to do it, not because it's a job. So it's I love going in the water every day and taking pictures and sharing this with everybody. It's just a joy. So let me go ahead and pull up my PowerPoint. And get that there. Let's see, share screen. Let's see, share screen. Here. Okay. Share. All right. You guys see the slideshow? All right, anybody there see the slideshow yet? I don't have any audio.
Yes, we see it.
Okay, let's see. I gotta try and get that to go full screen. Okay, there we go. All right, so we'll go on to the first page. So first things first, science has a lot of big words, and there are some that I have to explain before we go any further, because otherwise you'd be like, what are you talking about? So some of the things we're talking about are ecoregions. Ecoregions are geographically distinct areas, such as Hawaii. Hawaii it's a island chain, whereas also you have Fiji, or you have Japan, or the United States. Each one's an ecoregion, and so Hawaii has its own ecoregion. What is native? A native species is one that is naturally present before man's intervention. Alien species or introduced species, those are things that have been brought by man either intentionally or unintentionally. For example, the ta'ape and the Roy grouper, those two are fish that the state had brought in the 1950s to enhance the fisheries, but they became invasive, which is the next term. Just so we're on the same subject here, when you look at all the plants, almost all the plants you see where we live, those are plumeria, mangoes, those are all alien species. They've all been brought in by man. Very few native plants still exist, aside from naupaka and perhaps maybe the coconut tree. And most of the vegetation you see in Hawaii now in the lowlands is all introduced. Okay, now invasive. An invasive species is one that actively displaces native species. But an invasive is not always or necessarily an alien species. There are situations where if the water conditions are correct, then a native species can actually begin to overgrow or cause distress to native species. For example, there was a seaweed called bubble algae in Kaneohe Bay here on Oahu. And when there was sewage, raw sewage going into Kaneohe Bay, the bubble algae became really, really abundant, and it would grow these thick mats, and they would just cover over and smother the finger corals. So that was actually a native invasive species. But a alien invasive would be Ta'ape and Roy. An endemic species. An endemic species is one that is restricted to an ecoregion. And we have about 25% endemic Hawaiian fishes. And there are additional categories I'll talk to you about with examples. You can find endemics no place else, only to the ecoregion. And then finally, there's a relic species. A relic species is one that has no similar relative or sister species in other ecoregions nearby. So we have quite a few of those as well. So here are some of our famous relic species. And a few of these you may not see very often, especially around the main Hawaiian Islands. The top left corner is the male masked angelfish. And then we have a banded angel on the right. And below on the left is the checkered cowrie. And then of course, we have the Hawaiian monk seal. These are all endemic species. They are very, very unique and very different from any other species in nearby ecoregions. They have been in Hawaii for so long that whatever common sister species that lives in other parts of the Pacific are no longer present. Either they died off or something happened, but these are quite unique. So, for example, the masked angelfish, most divers in the main Hawaiian Islands have never seen this fish except if you go into an aquarium. And the masked angel likes colder water, and it prefers to live down below what's called the thermocline. And that is an area where the water temperature dramatically drops like 5 to 10 degrees depending upon the season. And they like the cooler water down past 150 feet. So in the Midway Islands up northwest, the water is actually cooler all year. And so these can live comfortably at about 40 to 60 feet, and divers can see them quite easily. But here in the main islands, you don't really get to see those unless you go past 300. The banded angel, for example, that one, you can see it off the Kona coast. I've seen a few in the years, but they're still quite uncommon, and they tend to like water past deeper than 50 feet. So they like cooler water as well. The checker cowrie is very famous. People who love to collect shells, that is one of the most desirable Hawaiian shells because it's got a very unique pattern, and there is no similar species around the world. But you can, if you're lucky, if you go diving, you look in the rubble pile at the base of a ledge, you might find an worn out old checker cowrie, and you're quite lucky. And then here, finally, the monk seal. The monk seal, there are three kinds of monk seals, one in the Caribbean, one in the Mediterranean, and one in Hawaii. They're so widely separated from each other. But at some point in the past, there was monk seals throughout these oceans, but now they've been limited to very, very small colonies. And in fact, the Caribbean one, I believe, is gone. So it's a leftover of the past, but they're all unique and different from each other in their own way. But just being separated geographically, they can't mate together, so they are considered different. Okay, so Hawaii is Earth's most isolated islands. Most of you have seen a map, and Hawaii is basically in the center of the northern Pacific. To any major landmass, like the continents, we are very far. So the closest we are is 2,400 miles to California, 4,100 miles to Japan, 5,000 miles to Indonesia. Now, Indonesia is important because that is where the highest number of marine species occurs. It is called the Coral Triangle, and this area is considered the hub of biodiversity of number of species. And so as you travel east or west from Indonesia, you will find that the number of species of any particular group will diminish as you travel in distance away from that point. So that was probably an area in the past that was very stable. It didn't change much, and the climate was very uniform. So a lot of species were happy there, and as currents take these larvae from that point out east or west to the Indian or Pacific Ocean, then they become established on various island groups, and they become isolated due to distances and larval lifespan. So we'll talk about that some more later. The Hawaiian Island chain, I'll show you a picture of the chain shortly. It's 1,000 miles from it's 1,000 miles from Honolulu to Midway, and from Honolulu, it's 1,000 miles to Palmyra, which is the Line Islands. Midway is important because it is the northwestern tip of the Hawaiian chain, the second to last exposed land before the islands become seamounts as they head towards Japan. And Palmyra is the other island group that is to our south. Those are two areas that actually are bridges for species to come into Hawaii. Johnston Island, which is 700 miles south of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, is also an important stepping stone. It is basically a bridge between Palmyra, which is south, and Johnston, and then up to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. So fishes and species can hop island to island, but the currents are usually unfavorable for this hopping. So it's a very rare occurrence when this does, when we get a new colonization. But the important thing to remember is that all these areas that are listed above are all downstream or down current from Hawaii, except for California. But California is in a different realm, because if you've been in California water, you know it's really, really cold, and marine larvae cannot survive that come from California like cold water. They can't survive all the way to Hawaii. So we don't have a lot of California species here. We may have a couple of Mexican triggerfish and jacks, but pretty much none will make it and survive to Hawaii. So it's not considered a source of species. So Hawaii, as you can see, is a very extraordinary place. There are 400 inshore fish species in the main Hawaiian Islands, and of those, 25% are endemic. Now, just talking about endemism and all that kind of stuff, most people know about Charles Darwin and his evolution theories. Well, the Galapagos sounds real cool, but they only have 9% endemism in the for fishes, so it's not that great. Hawaii is far above, much more unique. We have 1,100 shelled mollusks or snails and clams, and 20% of those are endemic. The snail above is called the Ostergaard's cowrie. That is a endemic species, and very, very prized by collectors. And the fish there, that red fish, is a female flame wrasse. In Hawaii, we have 70 hard corals. Of those, 14 are endemic. Corals, there are 500 in the Philippine, Indonesia region, the Coral Triangle, much, much more diverse there. Oh yeah, and fishes, we have 400. In the Indonesia Coral Triangle, there are about 2,200 species of reef fishes. So it's far, far more diverse as you go to the west from Hawaii. Seaweeds, we are quite good. We have a ton of seaweed species, and many of them are still undescribed. We have at least 500 species, And every time scientists do exploratory dives in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, they are collecting more and more new species that are as yet unidentified. And when you think about seaweeds, they can be leafy or they can be filamentous like hair and microscopic. So there is seaweed that grow up on seaweed. So there's so much that can be done. If you want to describe a new species and you're an expert, you can become a seaweed expert and you can pretty much get some name some new species. When it comes to fish, it's a lot harder. You have to dive really deep. Um, we also have 5 endemic stream gobies, or opu, and they are all endemic to the state. And in contrast, on land, the endemism is much, much higher. The ocean is very uniform. It has a lot of currents. It's easily connected as a unit. However, when it comes to plants, plants can only get here naturally, either by having their seeds float through the air, floating on the ocean surface, or carried on the feathers of birds. So the plants that have become established in the Hawaiian Islands before man um, came in over many, many, many years and have changed over time. And so now there was estimated to be about 1,400 species of plants and ferns, and 80% are endemic. And compared to Galapagos, about 30%. What's really tragic is that because of all the alien plants that have come in, and rats and pigs and snails and various kinds of alien creatures, diseases, the plants and human development of the land, that many, many, many of our native endemic species are already extinct. And Hawaii is actually the capital of extinction, species extinction in the United States, which is quite sad. Okay, so I was talking about the northwestern Hawaiian Islands and Midway and its significance. So here's a map of the Hawaiian Island chain in its entirety. So down here on the right, we have what's called the main Hawaiian Islands, or MHI. The main Hawaiian Islands are just a fraction of the entire length of this chain, but they are the only islands that are normally inhabited, permanently inhabited. Um, but beyond Niihau and Kauai, these islands are just remnants of what used to be. As the island is, as the Pacific plate is traveling over the hot spot of lava that comes up through the ocean's crust, these islands were forming a long time ago, and they eventually, the plate shifted over that spot and headed towards the northwest. The island began to erode, and because of the weight of the island, they begin to sink very slowly. But over many, many, many years, they become smaller and smaller, and then eventually, as they go all the way up to here, they just go below the ocean and they keep sinking. They become little seamounts. But what's really cool about this northwestern Hawaiian Island chain is that these areas are so isolated that people don't fish, and there's a lot of fish, a lot of big fish, a lot of rare fish, and the water's colder, so the fish that you are only seeing at 300 feet in the main Hawaiian Islands are happy in shallow water at diving depth. So when I ran the dive shop there in 99 and 2000, my first dive, I did a recon dive to see if I wanted to take the job. And I saw 15 kinds of fish I had never seen that were on the bucket list for Hawaii. And I was like, wow, yeah, I'm taking the job, so I'm staying here. Um, so look at the numbers here. We, in the main Hawaiian Islands, we are a little warmer. We are closer to the southern, the South Pacific, Central Pacific. There are 385 or so species of fishes. And these are kind of plastic numbers. They change as people find stuff or things change. So 385, Northwestern Hawaiian Islands is 305. But the endemism is about the same, 25 to 28. It's very similar. But the water temperature, this is the winter average winter temperature, 75 degrees in the main islands, and in Midway, Kure at the very northwestern end, 65 degrees. It's a 10-degree Fahrenheit difference. That's a big difference when you go in the ocean. You have to have a wetsuit. So at the surface water, you have this zone where those really rare fish are just happy. So because these islands are older, they also have more endemics, and it is divers who have been up there recently did some video surveys and did some diver surveys that at 200 plus feet, and 100% of the fish in that reef are endemic, and nearly all of them are like bucket list fish because they're so deep and so rare anywhere else. So it's quite a unique place. But the number of species is lower, 305 versus 385. That's because the water is too cold for some of the more tropical, warmer water loving fishes like Moorish idol or red lip parrotfish. Um, those are two that come to mind first that are not present because they just aren't happy in that colder water. So as you go up, the number of species drops off and the endemism percentage goes up. That's kind of cool. And I came up with this data myself, just looking at what I was seeing over those 2 years of diving every single day. So it's not published. So here's an example of a 30 to 50 foot reef at Midway. Not a lot of living coral, but lots of old, ancient, eroded limestone, caverns, great habitat for all kinds of fish. And when you look in the hole, you see endemic, endemic, endemic. And so we have these morwongs. These are endemic deep water fish. Then we have a bright red Hawaiian big eye or a veil. And behind that is gray and white fish is a male Hawaiian hogfish. And you don't see the big male hogfish in the main islands unless it's a place that's a reserve or very remote. So that's pretty cool. Really cool place to go visit if it ever opens again. Here are our ecoregions. I have 3 different graphics that will show you that just explain more about why Hawaii became this way. So here in green in the middle is Hawaii. Hawaii, and you see a circle down below as Johnston Atoll or Johnston Island. Below Johnston is this beige color. This is the Line Islands and Kiribati. And it's this ecoregion kind of includes French Polynesia, Cook Islands. So it's kind of like a commonality, a lot of common species in this area here. Hawaii got its own, but you can see this little linkage here. It's kind of close for Hawaii and the Line Islands. And then you see, as you head towards the purple coral triangle, that there are several other regions and subregions. But surprisingly, we have more Japanese species here. This magenta color. These Japanese species are actually coming more to Hawaii than ones from the Marshall Islands or from the Mariana Islands. That's because of ocean current patterns, which we'll look at shortly. Just kind of just shows you that certain parts of the Pacific are different from the others. It's not all the same. Here's an example of the number of species of corals with those ecoregions. And these 2 graphics came from the Corals of the World books from the Australian Museum. So here, Hawaii here has about, less than 100 species. And notice that the colors go more orange to red and brown, that the number of species goes way up. So for example, here, you can see the Indonesia, Philippines zone, coral triangle, 650. And then south of that, Fiji, Great Barrier Reef, Okinawa, 450, Tahiti, 200, Hawaii, 75. And actually, some of the corals actually make it all the way to the Mexican area, the Cabo San Lucas and all that, Panama. And they have about 25 species. They have a lot of cauliflower coral and some pork chop coral, some similar things. But it's quite interesting to see that linkage there. Also notice that if you travel from the Coral Triangle to the African continent, that also there's quite a few species across that smaller ocean there. The current takes them there directly to this side of the ocean basin. Notice that there's no coral species up high in the colder water. It's too cold for reef building corals. Okay. So what causes everything to distribute the way it is? What's the ocean currents? So before we talk about the current, you have to understand that marine life in general will come from egg and sperm. They'll hatch out, and they typically will have a larval phase that will drift about in the ocean without any real direct control of where they're going, and they're called plankton. And the plankton basically goes for a ride in the current. It has no control, just going to go with the flow, and it has a definite lifespan in the plankton, which can be just a few days to a few months. Depending upon the family group, some families are very short lived, like the gobies and the cardinal fishes. Their larvae just last a few days. And some of these actually, the cardinal fish will protect their eggs in the mouth of the male and until they hatch, and then they hatch out, he'll spit them out. So you can imagine that in the case of those type of fishes, that unless the islands are very close together, they're not going to spread very far. So you would expect to see a lot of different species as you travel across the oceans and the islands. But in the case of fishes that have a very long larval lifespan, like the Moorish idol or like the some of the larger surgeon fishes, unicorn, surgeon, those can be found throughout the Indian and Pacific Oceans, and some of them can range from the Red Sea all the way to Panama. So it just depends upon that particular family, how robust the larvae are, determines where they can end up being distributed to. Okay, so these currents are basically conveyor belts of water. Um, take into account that these arrows here are just showing the general direction. It doesn't mean that there's a highway here and the water in the middle is slower. It's a little slower, but it's not stationary. But the strongest parts of the current are where these arrows are showing. When we talk about the speed of the current, we're looking at about 1 mile per hour. So it's not a a fast ride. It's going to take a long time to go around the circle. So you can assume that the larvae that come from Hawaii aren't going to last too long because they'll probably drop out before they go to the Micronesia. And that is why Micronesia doesn't have that many fish that Hawaii we would consider very similar close species. There's a few like the Tinker's butterfly fish that we thought were endemic to Hawaii that are actually found in Guam, the Marianas. But there are no, or actually no, there are very few examples of endemic Hawaiian fish that have become non-endemic because of the drift. There's a couple like Thompson's Anthias that could be found in the Japanese islands that is similar, but it depends on who you talk to. When it comes to currents, we have a current that comes to Hawaii. This North Pacific gyre or current, it does a big loop. It takes several years. For example, when the tsunami happened in Japan, the Tohoku tsunami, the boats and debris that came from that event ended up washing ashore on the Pacific Northwest. But it took about a year or two for these to begin showing up. And then these actually eventually came to Hawaii in the wintertime. It takes a long time. There, because the water off California is quite cold, the larvae that come from California species don't survive long enough to make it to Hawaii. The only exception to this is the fine scale triggerfish, which is, you can see it here and there off Kona Coast. These occasionally come across to Hawaii and they have established a breeding population, but you don't see Garibaldi in Hawaii. So it's just freak events that bring these successfully to our islands. So what I want you to understand is that there's nothing upstream of Hawaii that brings larvae to us. We basically get all of our larvae from freak events of the current when you have storms or a reversal of the currents or things called eddies where they kind of spin off these little whirlpools, if you can call it that, that will bring larvae from the south or from Japan back towards the northwestern islands. Also, there is a zone here, this black line. This is kind of the thermal zone where tropical and subtropical fishes can no longer survive. And so anything above that won't survive. Anything that comes from above that won't survive. So we're kind of trapped in here. The equator also has a strong current that goes against the normal flow. What you would assume the normal flow is called the countercurrent. This can also form a pseudo barrier to north and south connection. So it's quite complicated, but that's just an example of why Hawaii is so isolated species-wise from the rest of the Pacific. In addition to that, there are also underwater lower level currents. The water in the ocean is layered, so you can have warm water on top that's going one way and cold water below is going the opposite direction. So there's also more dynamics that are involved with the deep ocean that complicate things even more. All right. So here is proof of colonization from those locations. So the top row are the Japanese species, the spotted knifejaw, which are examples are seen here around the main islands now. Here on the right is a nibbler. The nibbler is like a chub, but in a different family. And I discovered these over at Midway in '99, and Jack Randall confirmed the ID. And we wrote a paper together about this occurrence and range extension from Japan to the Hawaiian chain. You will not see these here on the main islands, and I've only seen a school of these once at Midway, and then they were gone. On the bottom row, we have fishes that come from the Line Islands or the south linkage from Palmyra or from Johnston Atoll. So Johnston Atoll actually is about 700 miles south of Honolulu, but it's only 400 miles south of the French Frigate Shoals Reef in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And Johnston Atoll has endemic fish of Hawaii as well as Central Pacific fish. So the slingjaw wrasse here and the chevron butterfly and the acropora coral, these three things have come from, we think, Johnston Atoll up to French Frigate. And so these two fishes here are found at French Frigate, but almost nowhere else except for freak occurrence of these chevrons here in Kaneohe Bay and a windward Oahu. And I'm sure there's other reports there, but that's the southern linkage. So it's proof that you have these stepping stone islands or these currents that come from the West Pacific from Japan in the summertime. The Kuroshio current brings warm Japanese water from that direction to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And the degree or extent of this current can change depending upon El Nino. So it's quite complicated. Okay, so also there are sister species. So sister species include things that are endemic to Hawaii, like this left column here. Hawaiian domino dacillus and the saddle wrasse. They're definitely endemic, but they have species in the central and west Pacific that are closely related, and probably they had a common ancestor. And so here the three-spot damsel or domino, and then we have a sunset wrasse. These are the closest cousins to the Hawaiian endemics. Interesting here, especially in Kona, there are observations of these sunset wrasse. What happens when you have these very close cousins or sister species, when they occur together with endemic and almost what they call an alien, they may decide to breed with each other because they have no other choice. And so it does happen. And I'll show you an example of what can happen in the worst case scenario with the sergeant majors at the end of this. Okay, so also endemic species tend to be very abundant or numerous and common. And the theory behind that is that these endemic species have been around for a long time. And so they have been able to be very effective in their role on the reef. And so they become very successful and produce a lot of offspring and are become very common. And so saddle wrasse is a very good example. When I do fish surveys or fish counts, usually the top 5, I would see saddle wrasse, maybe a sharp-nosed puffer, Hawaiian Gregory, and maybe the lavender tang. but oftentimes also Kole or gold ring surgeon, with some exceptions. But basically, these are usually the top 5 or top 10 on a fish survey. So it just goes to show you that an endemic species is actually also the benefit is that they're also very successful, because they found when they became established here as larvae and became a different species, that was just they found a sweet spot that is very good for them to survive. They do have sister species for these as well, except for the Kole. Kole, well, has a similar, but not quite, doesn't have a gold ring. But yeah, these all have sister species in the Central Pacific. When you go to the Midway, Northwestern Hawaiian Islands, there are there's a lot of very, very high number of endemics, and pretty much the endemic species almost outnumber the native widespread, like the veke, the papio. There's a lot of uhu that are endemic, and a lot of wrasses. It's really, really cool to go up there. It's just it's amazing. So if it ever opens up again, you have to go. Okay, so finally here, a phenomenon that happened within the last 25 years is the invasion of the Indo-Pacific Sergeant, this one here on the top right. The Indo-Pacific Sergeant was never recorded in the Hawaiian Islands until 25 years or so ago. And it is assumed that the Hawaiian endemic here in the top left is a sister species. It's related. But they're quite different when you look at them. The head shape is different. The colors and the bars and all are quite different. So the Hawaiian mama was happy here and abundant. And suddenly we started seeing these brightly colored other species at the time when the marine debris drift net issue became common knowledge. And so it is assumed that nets that came from the Central Pacific made it here, and they were carrying larvae or even juveniles of these Indo-Pacific sergeants. And actually, if you go snorkeling and you go near a buoy or some floating debris that's been in the ocean for quite a long time, you might find baby Hawaiian mamo next to it, but now you find these kind of mamo there too. And so it's determined that these came in by a indirect cause of man, and so it's considered alien. And they became established. They began to form breeding colonies. And at about 20 years ago, I told Jack Ryan, I swear I saw a hybrid mamo. It looked different. I couldn't put my finger on it, and I didn't have good pictures. Back in those days, it was film, and you couldn't take a bunch of shots. And of course, when it comes to a rare fish, you can never get the great shot because it always runs away. But I guess I had this feeling it's a hybrid. And so this bottom here, that is a hybrid, an adult. And the picture on the right, on the left here, is a example of all three together. This is off of Waikiki, about 15 feet. You can see here's a hybrid out front, and there's a Hawaiian mamo, and below that in the bottom there is a Indo-Pacific. So what I didn't realize until some friends of mine at University of Hawaii and Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology, they're doing genetic research as well as catching fishes and doing doing their biology on them. Richard Coleman did his PhD on this issue, and it was really interesting to see his data, because not only do you have a 1-in-1 hybrid half breed, but there's like second generation hybrid, third generation hybrid, fourth generation. There are all these layers of hybrids, because hybrids are mating with this one, or this one mates with this one, or hybrid and hybrid. It's a mess. And you can't always tell on the outside. They may look like one or the other, but their genetics are actually mixed. So the implications of this for our native endemic species is bad, because if this happens enough, then it's going to dilute and there's not going to be that many leftover, purebred mammals. So it's a good example of what happens when, man should not introduce things on purpose to an area, especially because these kind of crazy things can happen. Um, so that's a good example of what goes on. It's really cool because having a camera and being able to see and record these things and then say, hey, what do you think about this? That is so valuable because I mean, now that digital is so much easier, people are learning so much more about the oceans, and making range extension or reports of, I saw this fish here. Oh, really? It wasn't recorded here before. So I think digital photography is a making it so easy and accessible to anybody that we are learning from technology. All right. So here's my website. Um, it has everything that I was able to photograph, including land plants and a lot of things from outside of Hawaii, California, where I've been traveling, Cuba, California, Indonesia, Palau. I've got all kinds of stuff on there, all kinds of species. It's been growing and growing. But if you are trying to identify a critter or a plant, give it a try. If you are stumped or you just don't know where to start, feel free to send me an email through the contact page on here. Send me pictures. Send me some pictures via email. I'm happy to respond. And if I don't get to you right away, be patient. It may have gone into spam, but I'll check. But I'm always available to answer questions. I love to connect with people and just learn about what's people are finding, because it's we learn from each other. And if you have something really, really cool that I don't have a good picture of, I'll be happy to put your name on it and add it to the collection on the website for everybody else to appreciate and to use. And with that, I can start taking questions.
Awesome, Keoki. That was so great. Gosh, a plethora of information, which brings us to our first question. We wanted to know, we have from, I believe it's Melody, how many hours do you have underwater or days? Have you ever counted?
Well, I started scuba diving in 1984, and I would say I probably have over 5,000 scuba dives. I don't really keep a log anymore. Just so many. And I did a lot of diving when I was helping with the Navy. It's a lot of up and down to watch sea lions do their thing and look for mines and stuff like that. So it was a lot of working dives that were not really fun dives. And so it's just like up and down all day, and it counts as dives. So I would say now I don't dive as much because I'm running snorkel trips for the Oceanic Society to places like Palau and Fiji, and I'm just snorkeling for 7 days straight. I might do a couple dives at the pier after we're all done, but I do maybe 10 dives in a year now. But
Yeah,
when I snorkel on a trip, man, I snorkel a lot. I'm in the water. I probably do 1,000 up and down dives in a day.
perfect.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's 5,000 lives is quite a lot. So Mark B has a question. He wants to know if you've noticed any impact from the aquarium trade on our endemic species, and do you think it's a sustainable industry? I just
Well, yeah, great. That's one of those questions like, oh, how am I going to answer this one? It's I think there is an impact on the number of endemic species. And of course, the endemic species are the targeted species. Yellow tang is also very popular. Yellow tang is found almost no place else except for Hawaii. So it's almost pseudo-endemic. It's the only place that's easily accessible. So, I mean, if you look at the really popular fish like the Hawaiian lionfish, the banded angel, the Tinker's butterfly fish, these aren't as common as they used to be. When I talk to old timers, they say, "Oh yeah, you see those banded angels all over the place now, no more." And so I think it does have an impact. And fisheries reserves are a good idea because if you can't, eliminate the tropical fish collecting overall, setting aside enough reserves for fish, for food fish, as well as ornamental fish to populate and to breed and resustain or refill our reefs. That's important. So that's a very political question. So I have friends on both sides of that, and so it's a hard one. But I know that when I go diving in a reserve and outside a reserve, I can tell.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question from our viewers is asking, what's an endemic species that we wouldn't realize is rare to Hawaii, but that seems common?
Hawaiian Gregory is one of those that you think, oh, that's a gray little fish. It's no big deal, but that's you know, it's one of our endemics. Another one, let's see. If you go to my website, there's a, and go to the fishes page, there is a link to Hawaiian endemic fishes, which is a very, very good tool. You saw it all on one page. You scroll down, you see all of them all together. Um, hmm. Gold ring surgeon is another endemic. Sharp-nosed puffer. There's a lot of things that are endemic that are just really, you don't even think about. I can't even think of them off the top of my head because they're so common. I don't even, you know, you see it like, oh yeah, whatever, it's one of those. But um, if it's common, it's probably, or millet seed butterfly, also another common one. That's a good one. Okay.
Sorry,
No.
now I'm back. We have a question from Anari. She says, hi, Keoki, I enjoyed your presentation. Do you have a favorite spot to find nudibranchs?
What island?
She's from the mainland, but she comes to the Big Island to dive with us, and I think she plans to travel elsewhere in Hawaii.
Okay, I haven't looked too much for nudibranchs on the Kona coast, but I know some friends up north, they go to Kauai Harbor and they night dive or night snorkel in, around the boat ramp. That I've seen some really cool stuff come out of there.
Yeah.
I imagine Kahalu'u might have something. What you want to look for nudibranchs, if you're, it has to have a lot of sponges or things growing on the rock. Um, you don't want a whole lot of live coral like Honau now, Kealakekua. They're not that good because they have too much living coral. Nudibranchs and snails in general, mollusks do not like live coral. So you want to go where it's got more seaweed and more rocks and um, non-live coral.
Awesome. Good tip on Kauai. That's where I find a lot of great ones too. So good job. Wanted to ask you our last question. We want to know how we can locally better support and protect Hawaii's endemic species.
I think you should support efforts that if fisheries reserves are proposed, you know, definitely want to testify when they have public hearings. Also, you know, reef safe sunscreens. Um, don't litter the ocean. You know, no plastics. Just the kind of things that we've all been told that are you know good for the environment. Continue doing those things, but also you want to educate other people. You want to pass on the knowledge that you pick up with others because it's interesting, and also it might trigger them to start learning about it, and then they become really passionate about something like that. So share what you know, and then keep reading, keep learning. I mean, most of the stuff that I know and I talk about is not because I went to school. It's because I was reading and seeking the information myself because I was curious about it. So, you know, learning and sharing and from others is really important.
Awesome. We have actually one additional question from Gene, who's been hanging in the whole day. He's excited to hear you. And he says, are harlequin shrimp native to Hawaii?
Okay, Harlequin shrimp are native to Hawaii, but they're not endemic. There's two species. There's the ones that we have here with the more purple, magenta colored spots. And the one from the Western Pacific has more of the lilac or more bluish purple. That's a different species now that they've discovered it's separate. But they are native to Hawaii. But yeah, that's one of those that's also very highly impacted by collectors.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned Keoki. A great way to learn about these is to read about them and to, you know, let your curiosity drive you. We have this fantastic book that you are featured in. Many of Keoki's photos and behavior observations were posted in this book, which we're going to be giving away. It's the Hoover's Ultimate Guide to Hawaiian Reef Fishes. Keoki's been in many books, both his beautiful photography, which you've seen in his presentation, and you can go on his website at marinelifephotography.com. We use it quite extensively to ID fish when we're diving as instructors here at Jack's Diving Locker. And literally, Keoki is quite a legend in our eyes. So we're so excited, Keoki, that you came to join us today. We really appreciate it. Mahalo nui loa to you. And we are going to be giving away gifts now. You're welcome to hang out with us, Keoki, but we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you.